she saw Our Lady at least 14 times. Here, Juan Diego only saw her 4 times. She actually speaks to Juan Diego here as opposed to Bernadette. She says one sentence to Bernadette. So like Bernadette sort of had this tortured experience, if you will, with Our Lady, more in the year 1800, I believe, and this was in the year 1500. Whereas this is just, when you read this story and compare it to Lourdes, this is just so much more of a pleasing apparition, if you will, a more pleasing experience. Whereas Bernadette really suffered through her experience with Our Lady. It was still very beautiful, very fruitful, but I just, for my own personal experience, is the contrast of those two particular apparitions and how Our Lady chooses to appear to individuals and how she interacts with individuals is so different, even with, if you read Fatima as well, a very different experience. So our faith is quite beautiful and quite mysterious. So what we'll do, we'll go through the story of Juan Diego. We'll look at some of the effects in Mexico and the Mexican culture, the Aztec culture, as a result of the apparition. We'll take a look at the tilma, and we'll take a look at the image. So keep those two things in mind, very different. The tilma, we refer to the tilma as both the image and the tilma, but in this case, the tilma will be the actual material, and then the image is that image that appears on the tilma. So we'll look at those two things differently. You see there, this is the shrine to Our Lady of Guadalupe, which appears in it's a chapel of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which appears in the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception up in D.C. Really beautiful chapel they have there dedicated to Our Lady of Guadalupe. Recently completed, I believe. Yeah, that's this here. It's in the shrine, the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. It's one of the small chapels on the first floor. Okay, so how do we today know about the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe? How did that story survive, right? We're talking about the year 1500, 1531 to be exact. This is just, 50 years after Columbus sails the ocean blue, right? That little rhyme, 1492, the year Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? So it's less than 50 years later. They've just defeated the Aztecs. The conquistadors recently defeated the Aztecs. So this is a very primitive land. So how does this apparition survive other than the image? How does the story survive? So there's this Codex, 1548. It's a piece of parchment. It's called the Codex Escalada. Escalada is the last name of the Jesuit priest that brought this piece of parchment to historical light. Now, interesting enough, he didn't bring it to historical light until 1995, which is around the time when JP2 canonizes Juan Diego. So this, historically, there's been some tests. It's deerskin. It's a piece of parchment made of deerskin. It's a single sheet. I don't exactly know the size of it. This is the original. This is more or less, oh, sorry, wrong button. This is more or less what it looks like originally, right? And these are some enhanced images, and this is Our Lady of Guadalupe. And I believe you can see here what they say is Juan Diego. So what this codex, and the reason it's called a codex is because it contains a story or a narrative. Sometimes we hear codex as a longer work of literature, right? Something that's longer, it's maybe got more information in it, but this is just one simple piece of deerskin, a piece of parchment, signed in 1548 because there's a date on this up here. It says 1548, and this is in the original Aztec language, Natuel. I don't know if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but it's all in the original Natuel language, and it's signed down here by a Franciscan at the time, Franciscan Bernardino de Sahagún, who was a historian and it attests to his vision. Essentially, they refer to this also as his death certificate, because what's written in the Natural language is paying homage to him, saying that he died a graceful death, the visionary of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So he would have died in 1548 if this record is accurate. And again, tests prove its authenticity as so much as its age. Some question why this particular Franciscan signed it and not the Archbishop. So it's not necessarily an authoritative piece, but it is well known in academic circles and regarded. Also, they also question why did this come out in 1995. Why did I don't really know the details of that story, but that's when it was brought into public attention in 1995. So that is one early probably the oldest written testament that we have, aside from the tomb itself, of Our Lady of Guadalupe appearing to Juan Diego. The next earliest piece of writing is what's called the Nican Mopu'ua. All right, this is also written in the native Aztec language. Nican Mopu'ua translates to, Mopova. Translates to, here it is told. Okay, this document is 16 pages long, and it is the oldest surviving testament of the apparition. It is not written by Juan Diego. It's written, another gentleman, don't recall his name, it's here somewhere, but it's written, scholar Antonio Valorino, who lived from 1521 to 1605. So they say this was written approximately 1556, roughly 25 years. Maybe it was written on the 25th anniversary of the apparition in 1431. This document is then published as a part of a larger work, the Hue, I don't know how to pronounce that, Talamiwa Kotika, which is called The Great Event. And this is a 34-page work, printed in 1649 by the vicar of the chapel of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So what we'll see is, as soon as the tilma is revealed to the bishop, the next day he builds a chapel on Tepeyac Hill. So as of 1531, January 1532, there's a chapel. So in 1649, there was already a chapel dedicated to Our Lady of Guadalupe, and the vicar produces this, and this is included in that. So this was written in 1556, but not really circulated until 1649, when this is written. And it's also written about Our Lady of Guadalupe and the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So what does this initially tell us about Juan Diego? Born in 1474, so at the time of the apparition, he was, if I do my math right, roughly 57 maybe. And this was his indigenous name, Goaltautsin, which means eagle that speaks, which is very interesting. Eagle that speaks. La águila que habla. Eagle that speaks, which will resonate with us a little later on. He's from a middle class. He's considered part of the middle class of Aztec culture. So he's a landowner, and land is passed down generationally in that middle class. He's married, not at the time of the apparition, but he was a married man. He and his wife together convert to Catholicism through the influence of the Franciscan missionaries that are there, as well as his uncle Juan Bernardino. Shortly after he and his wife convert, his wife dies, but he stays wholly devoted to the Catholic faith. He walks about 9 miles a day from his home to the mission, where he would attend daily mass and he would go to catechesis. So, and the reports are not so sure, but whether he learned Spanish or understood some Spanish, but he would go to catechesis in the Catholic faith on a daily basis. And it was part of this, during one of these daily walks, where he encounters Our Lady. So the first apparition, and the apparitions occur, yes, for Paco.
Sorry, was he Aztec?
He was Aztec, yes. Yeah, Juan Diego was Aztec. So remember, Juan Diego is his baptized name. Maria Lucia is his wife's baptized name. His real name was, his native name was that, which means eagle that speaks. So Tepeyac Hill is important because at least if you, and this is in Aztec historic literature, that in Tepeyac Hill, the Aztecs, the native Aztecs, would go there to worship the mother goddess. Now, the mother goddess goes through a few different manifestations in the history of Aztec culture. We'll see here two different manifestations. This is, at the time of the apparition, this was the current manifestation. This preceded her, if you will. But Tepeyac Hill was known where they would go and worship the mother goddess. Now, there is some conflict as to whether or not the Aztecs actually had a temple, if you will. At the time of Juan Diego, there was no temple on Tepeyac Hill. It was a bare hill. There's some reports that the Franciscan missionaries tore it down when they got there, that they went and tore.
Sorry, there is a red truck plugging everybody. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So there are some reports that the missionaries took it down. But Tepeyac Hill has been known as where the Aztecs would go to worship their mother goddess. Now, interesting, Guadalupe, one of the earlier manifestations of the mother goddess in Aztec culture, has a lot of symbolism here, right? That name, Coatzacoalcos, means skirt of eagles, or skirt of serpents. It translates literally to skirt of serpents. And you hear she's got a skirt, and these are all serpents. Now, there's a lot of symbolism. I'm not going to go through it. The only one I want to point out to is here. This is a skull, and this is like the womb of the mother goddess. And the womb of the mother goddess was the place of death. And we'll see that contrasted to the womb of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is a place of life. So this was the place of death, where the Aztecs believed when you died, you returned back to the womb of the mother goddess. So it was the place of death. And this is Tonanitzin. And there's an interesting part of her name I'll get to, but she was the Virgin Mother Goddess. So Our Lady of Guadalupe appears, she's the Virgin Mother. So interestingly, she appears on Tepeyac Hill where the Aztecs would go and pay homage to these two representations of their pagan mother goddess. Now, Tonanitzin, let me just pull this out here. Tonanitzin, Tonan, would have been the name of the mother goddess. The suffix Tzin, Titzin, Tonanitzin, meant in their native language was a way to revere or to show affection for. So Tonan meant mother or mother goddess. Tonanitzin was a way to revere this through language, Tonanitzin. So that Tzin is important because it shows us how Our Lady of Guadalupe is trying to connect with Juan Diego. So Juan Diego's on this trip going to the mission for Mass. He walks by Tepeyac Hill and he hears this beautiful singing. And he thinks to himself, where is this coming from and why am I hearing this beautiful singing? And he hears a voice that calls out, Juanitzin, Juan Diegotzin. So she uses that suffix with his last name to indicate that she's referring to him with affection and reverence, to show him, you may think of yourself as lowly or not of a higher class, but I refer to you with this reverent language. So he hears this and he's like, who is this? And he goes up the east side of Tepeyac Hill, which some people say is indicative of, the sun rises in the east. In the past, all the altars face the east. So the reports are that he rises up Tepeyac Hill on the east side where he encounters Our Lady. He meets Our Lady. She says who she is and tells him, go and tell the bishop, you're on your way, tell the bishop that you saw me and tell him I want a temple built on this hill, dedicated to me, the Mother of God, to replace these pagan goddesses. So he does. He goes down, makes his way, meets the bishop, and I'm being a little short with some of this story, but meets the bishop, and the bishop dismisses him, my understanding, rather kindly so, but says, okay, great, I really don't believe you, be on your way. He walks home 9 miles, encounters her that same day, encounters her again. And he says, hey, look, this guy wants nothing to do with me. You better choose somebody of higher status, some higher statute. He's not. If you want this done, I'm not the guy. I'm too lowly. He's not going to listen to me. Pick somebody else. And she says something really beautiful, like, I have no lack of servants, she says. I have no lack of people that would do my bidding, that would do my will. But I chose you, and I insist that you do this. And I insist that you go back to him tomorrow and tell him again that you saw me and that I request a chapel be built on this hill. So he leaves her presence. Next day, wakes up, walks past the hill, does not have an apparition on the way there. Okay, so the day before, 2 apparitions. The next day, walks, I don't know if it's morning, midday, whatnot. He walks past the hill, returns to the bishop, tells the bishop, hey, I saw her again, and she says she wants this chapel built on this hill. The bishop gets a little bit more aggressive, interrogates him a little bit more on what she looks like, who she says she is, where do you see her, how do you hear her, and ultimately says, bring me a sign. If you want me to believe you, bring me some evidence that, in fact, you are seeing who you say you're seeing. And Juan Diego goes on his way, and the bishop sends this is an interesting piece, the bishop sends some people after him to try to, figure out where he's going, to see if he's a fraud or if he's conspiring with some people, and ultimately they can't find him. They lose him. Imagine this is a 9-mile journey through the hill country there of Mexico. So they return back, and they return back and report that they lost him, that they on his way they couldn't find him. So on the 4th apparition is Juan Diego on the way back. Now, on the way back, this is the third apparition. On the way back, so on the way back from the people following him, he goes and tells the Virgin again, hey, he again dismissed me, but he said he wants evidence. If you want this to happen, give me some evidence to show him that, in fact, you were appearing to me, and he'll believe me. And she says, okay, come back tomorrow morning, and I'm going to give you evidence. And then you can take that evidence to him. And Juan Diego says, okay, fine. So Juan Diego goes back home, spends the night, wakes up the next morning, finds his uncle. Remember, his uncle had also converted. His uncle's baptismal name was Juan Bernardino, is gravely ill. And he fell ill overnight, assumed something like maybe a high fever or something at that time. And Juan Diego's concerned. Remember, his wife has died. There's no children. Juan Diego takes care of the uncle. So Juan Diego decides that, I know the Virgin wanted me there to find this evidence, but I got to take care of my uncle. I have to walk through Tepeyac Hill, but I'm not gonna go to my normal spot. I'm gonna go find some medical help for my uncle. And he does this, and as he walks by Tepeyac Hill, the Virgin actually comes down the hill. He sees her come down the hill, and this is where the Virgin says something very beautiful to him. And he says, hey, listen, I'm sorry, but my uncle's gravely ill, and I have to tend to him. And she says, am I not here, I who have the honor to be your mother? Are you not in my shadow and under my protection? Am I not the source of your joy? Do you need something more? So that beautiful line, we often hear that, am I not here, I who am your mother? And here it says, I who have the honor of being your mother. So this very reassuring statement to Juan Diego, I'm your mother. Trust in me, have faith in me. And she tells him, by the way, your uncle is healed. So Juan Diego has faith in that, and actually you'll read that there's even a 5th apparition, which is the uncle who actually sees Our Lady of Guadalupe as well. And we'll get to that because the name Our Lady of Guadalupe actually comes from this so-called 5th apparition where Juan Bernardino sees Our Lady of Guadalupe. So in the 4th apparition, Our Lady comes down, says, hey, I'm here for you, trust in me. And he does. And then she says, okay, now the evidence, go up the hill. There's some flowers up there that do not typically grow at this time of year and in this location. Collect the flowers and come show me what you've collected. Rosas de Castilla.
Which only grow in Spain in a place called Castilla.
So they didn't belong there. And there's some stories that on 3 different occasions, Our Lady arranged the roses, the flowers, in the tilma of Juan Diego. She arranged them how she wanted to, and then closed it back up. And she told Juan Diego, take this to the bishop. Do not open it until you are in his presence. Right? So if he's not allowed to open it. Now, curiously enough, the reason being, when he opens them, right, we'll see, he gets to the bishop and he comes in, his tilma's full of roses, and he meets the bishop. There's other people in there, and he says, I have the sign, and unveils it, and the image appears. There's light, so they're in a room that doesn't have windows. He walks in, Juan Diego walks in, he's got the back to the door, he opens like this, and boom, a flash of light, and then the image. There's some reports that the roses are once he does this, the roses disappear. The roses were a photo, there's a word, Rodolfo, remind me of the word? Photosensible. So in the sense that they're sensitive to light, and they imprint the image, right? That's the miracle, not only that he sees Our Lady, that these roses are not even of this area of that time, but they imprint an image miraculously, immediately, on the tilma of Juan Diego. And the bishop has no need for any more questions or any more evidence, immediately falls to his knees, and praises Our Lady, gives her thanks, and as I said, demands that a temple be built immediately on Tepeyac Hill, and the reports are that, in fact, within days, there's a makeshift temple with a straw roof where the tilma is then displayed there, right? So keep in mind, and we'll talk about this, but this makeshift temple in 1532 in January, in the winter of that time, very makeshift hut with a straw roof, this miraculous image is displayed there in honor of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So, why Our Lady of Guadalupe? That particular name. As I mentioned, the Virgin revealed her name to the uncle. She never says her name, Our Lady of Guadalupe. She reveals herself as Mary, as the mother of God, but never Our Lady of Guadalupe to Juan Diego, but does so to Juan Bernardino, and says, I am the perfect Virgin Mary of Guadalupe. Now, Guadalupe is a Spanish term that predates this apparition on Tepeyac Hill, because there is a monastery on the Iberian Peninsula called the Monastery of Guadalupe of Extremadura. The Iberian Peninsula was once, if you guys know history, taken over by the Moors. The Islamists were there. There was Arab influence. Guadalupe is actually, the etymology of the word is Arabic, meaning that which leads the water, or it's the river of black gravel, like the riverbed, that on which the water flows, that which gives direction for the water. That's what the term Guadalupe means. So there's the majority of academics believe that Our Lady said Guadalupe, and the Spanish understood Guadalupe, and they connected Guadalupe with Our Lady of Guadalupe, which also a lot of conquistadors came from that area. So they were familiar with this term. And Guadalupe, meaning that which leads to water, right? And Our Lady is that who leads us to Christ, the living water. Now, there is some small circles that say that Our Lady may not have spoken the word Guadalupe, because Juan Bernardino was older and of Aztec origin, as was Juan Diego. They either, did not have a grasp of the English language, and the native Aztec language did not have the G or the D sound. That was not present in their language. So some scholars believe that if she would have spoken that, they wouldn't have been able to repeat it. So some scholars believe that she said, I think I have that here, two other words. Could have been two other words. Let me see if I can get these pronunciations here.
Coadlaxopeu.
So that's the first word.
Coadlaxopeu.
Okay, and that word Well, if you see these two, the prefix C-O-E-T-L, and then P, Lopeo here, C-O-E-T. C-O-E-T means serpent in that native language, means serpent. And Lopeo means that who dwells with the beasts. So in these two words are very related, right? This one here, which we'll pronounce here.
Coatlaxopeu. Coatlaxopeu.
Coatlaxopeu. So some people say it kind of sounds like Guadalupe, and that word means the one who crushes the head of the serpent, which again, very apropos to Our Lady who crushes the head of the serpent. The second word here, let's see if I can bring up that pronunciation as well.
Guadalupe. Guadalupe.
Guadalupe. Guadalupe.
So that's
Guadalupe.
I think that's a human voice. So that's a little bit more like Guadalupe. And this one means the one who's in charge of the serpents. This word here, like the one who's in charge of the serpents. And then so the scholars also link this to this name here, which I said is that earlier representation of the mother goddess, Coatlicue, the one who has the death in her womb. So some academics say she might have spoken this name in reference to these other mother goddesses, indicating that she is the one who, and also remember, skirt of serpents. This here translates to skirt of serpents. So she's the one who is above these serpents, steps on the head of these serpents. So I found that kind of interesting about the particular debate on the name Guadalupe and where that could have come from. Just died on me. Okay. All right, so what happens as a result of Our Lady? I'm going to go through this. One beautiful thing that happens in a 10-year period of Our Lady, the transformation of Mexico. Within 10 years, 9 million native Mexicans are converted to Catholicism. And if you break that down, that's roughly a few thousand a month, right? A few thousand a month are being baptized within South America to the Catholic faith as a direct result of the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Interesting, too, are some dates. 1531 in December is just about 1 decade after the conquistadors arrive and they defeat Montezuma II. 10 or so years prior, or 20 years prior, if you recall, Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses on the Castle Church of Whittington, Germany, and sparks the Protestant Revolution. And in 5 years, in 10 years upon that, upon Martin Luther moving, we lose 4 to 5 million Catholics who leave the church. So that's happening on the east side of the world. On the west side, Our Lady appears, and within 10 years, she's brought twice as many Catholics to the church than left at the Protestant Reformation. And you also, 2 years prior to the apparition in 1531, Henry VIII divorces with Rome as a result of the fact that it wouldn't recognize his divorce to his wife at the time, Anne. Is it Anne? So that also leads to more Catholics leaving the church. So her apparition is, if you look at it in world events, it's a direct response to what's happening on the east where Catholics are leaving the church. So she's here in the New World, and she's bringing back twice as many people to the New World, to Catholicism that left. And interestingly enough, this is happening at the top-down model. So it's not the lower class, if you will, or the poor of Mexico that are converting first. It's the folks in leadership in Mexican culture at that time, the Aztecs at that time. They were converting, and as a result of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and then they were serving as witnesses for those under them to convert. So that's also very interesting that it's a top-down model.
Eric, I think I've read, I may be wrong, somebody can correct me, but I think I've read that this is considered the largest evangelization ever to have occurred in history.
I wouldn't doubt that's the case, yeah. I mean, this is, remember, but just math alone, it's a few thousand a month, right, in a small area of the world at that time. So let's take a closer look at the tilma. So the tilma is made of a particular fiber. It looks like a cactus. It's more like an aloe vera plant, and it's made of this fiber, which is a rough fiber. You guys know what burlap is, right? It looks kind of similar to burlap. So it's a giant piece of burlap that you would wear over. None of us are artists, at least Falero's not here. But you see burlap. You're not going to paint on burlap, at least with not any type of accuracy, right? You're not going to paint on it. So this is something that's very similar. It's a cactus fiber. It's not something you would paint on. And these things only lasted 20, 25 years back then. If you took really good care of it, it could last you 50 to 60 years, right? But in the hustle and bustle of 1550, it's not. It's going to last you 20, 25 years at most. And this particular tilma, right away, as I said, it's taken by the bishop and is put on display in a makeshift little temple on top of Tepeyac Hill with a palm-thatched roof, candle smoke, and it's exposed to the elements. It's being revered at this point by quite a few people. So it's exposed, right? It's not in this container. I mean, nowadays you go see this, and it's like bulletproof glass. If anything happens, this thing just turns around super quickly into this like secret chamber. It's like super well protected now. But for hundreds of years, it was exposed. And it lasted hundreds of years, and it shouldn't. It should not have lasted hundreds of years. And there's a couple other things that happened to it that are more famous. In 1778, so in 1778, there's already a basilica built at the base of the hill. So there's a small church on top of the hill. A basilica is already built by 1770 something at the base of the hill, and this thing is on display at the base of the hill, so it's a little bit cared for, and it's being maintained. Workers that maintain it spill nitric acid on it, and the nitric acid should have really dissolved the fiber, but it doesn't. So what it does leave is this little stain right here, which is more visible from the back, I read. But this nitric acid, the people that have studied this thing should have said this should have just completely disintegrated. The acid should have just eaten away at this thing, and it did not. So that's attributed also to its miraculous nature. In the year 1700, so prior to the nitric acid incident, there's a Jose Ignacio Barlotoche, which was at that time a well-known artisan of Spanish nature who was a skeptic of miracles, recreates the tilma on nearly identical material, right? So it's a couple hundred years after the apparition. This material is probably still very readily available. He paints a very accurate image of this image on the fibers, same size and everything. He paints two of them. I don't know what happened to one of them, but he paints and he displays his version also in the same temple of the image. But his replica, within 10 years, just turns to dust. It's useless. And to his dismay, to many, and it proves the miraculous nature of this thing, that an exact copy on the exact same material with the best paints available at that time, made by a well-known artisan, within 10 years is disintegrated, gone. And in 1921, maybe if you guys know, there's a bomb attack. So this is pre-Vatican II, right? So this is the altar here facing, right? The congregation's behind him, the tilma's up here. There was a bomb placed right here in 1921, hidden in flowers. I don't know the motive. I imagine the man was a skeptic, maybe. Who knows? But he placed a bomb there, leaves. Shortly after he leaves the temple, this thing explodes. It cracks the marble all the way down here, does significant damage to some of these candle lights, and does this to the cross, right? Which is not on the altar, it's off to the side here. And here's the tilma. So this thing explodes, right? There's the cross. That's a more contemporary picture. But nothing happens to the image. The frame is not damaged. The glass is not scratched. Absolutely nothing happens. And look, it's within proximity. And windows of this sanctuary blew out as a result of this bomb. But nothing happened to the tilma.
By the way, they have at the basilica,
Yeah, the blast. Yeah. I mean, again, this is in 1921. You know, we're not talking about today's bulletproof glass, right? This at most probably should have come down, cracked, and fell over. But that none of that happens. So let's take a closer look at the image, right? She's reflected as the woman that appears in the book of Revelation. She's adorned, standing on top of the moon. And if you look up Our Lady in the book of Revelation, you see this. This is the image you see. She stands in a downward posture. I'm going to go through some of this here in a little bit more detail. So again, remember, she appears on Tepeyac Hill. That's where she asked for the chapel to be built. Remember, Tepeyac Hill is where they would go for their pagan mothers. So what's really beautiful and miraculous about the way Our Lady communicates is that this entire image here, if you were of Aztec culture and you were raised in Aztec culture, this was like reading a book. They looked at this image and it's like reading a book to them. I would tell you the word hieroglyphics, you think of Egypt, but in Aztec culture they also they wrote in hieroglyphics as well, so they communicated with images. So the images that are throughout this entire picture, I was hoping to display a much larger one that we have here, but let me see if I can do this. That's a little bigger. So right away to the Aztecs, she's in front of the sun. Right? I mean, the Aztecs were pagans. They had many gods, and each god had they were a naturalistic religion. So she's in front of the sun. So to them, she's immediately more important than their sun god. She's on top of their moon god, immediately more important than the.
Because it was no moon. It was on that fourth, you know, that there is the moon doesn't show. There was no moon. And that's why it looks black, you know, because there was no moon. It was the fourth.
Okay.
Call it, you know.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, on the night that she appeared.
In the night that she appeared.
Yeah. It was a crescent moon.
That's
I'll get to a little bit more of that as well.
Right.
So the sun, the moon, the eagle's wings. Now, what's curious about the eagle in Aztec culture was the messenger, right? The herald. He would bring a message, and oftentimes as well was the herald or the harbinger of sacrifice. The sacrifice was to come when the eagle was present. So Our Lady here she's bringing a message. She's the herald of the message, and she brings the sacrifice of our Lord. The black sash up high, the Aztecs wore black sash. Females wore them down low, but if you were pregnant, you would wear them down high. A sash around the neck, and if I had a close-up, there's a small little cross in her sash, a cross which was reflective of the crosses that they would see on the Franciscan missionaries. So not only is she greater than the sun god, greater than the moon god, she is a herald. She's bringing a message of sacrifice, but she's in a downward posture with this cross, which means she is subject to something greater than her. Not the sun god, not the moon god, which were the top gods there. Something greater than her. She is pointing us towards something greater. She's genuflecting towards something, and that would be towards our Lord, who is in her womb.
Right.
Right.
That's something that you don't want to believe it, but that she appeared there with Jesus on her womb.
Right.
You know.
And I'll go to this next slide here, going to what Gumercindo was saying. The constellation here. Now, she also, if we had a close-up image, this dress is full of flowers, right? And the flowers are perfectly symmetrical. And they have images there that all speak to the Aztecs as Mother Earth. She's an earthly woman. She's a human woman, but she's clothed with this mantle full of stars and of this color blue, which is to them is heaven. So she is earthly and clothed with heaven. So she is where heaven and earth come together, where heaven and earth meet. And these stars were later studied.
The constellation.
These stars were juxtaposed, right, with the stars, and they reveal the constellations, not as viewed from the earth up, right? So it's not from the position of us looking at the stars, but from a position of someone outside of the solar system looking into the earth, and the stars were positioned at that time from that perspective. And due to our astrological or cosmological records, we can, the positions of the stars, all that physics and science, we can trace that back to 1531, and I'll show you a better image. But these constellations as shown here all are accurate to the constellations that they would have appeared in 1531 on December 12th, as she appeared there. There are some critics that say these stars were added after 1700. Some believe that they were added after 1700, but that's been debunked because first I showed you that codex from 1548, and it has Our Lady there represented in 1548. She has the stars on her mantle. And in the Battle of Lepanto, the Spanish soldiers took a replica of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and that was in 1570, and the replica in fact reflects the stars there. So there are some people that say, well, the stars were added later, but in fact, the historical evidence says they were not added later. So take a closer look at this idea of the constellation. Oh, it might be a little blurry. Can you guys see? So this is the mantle. This outline, these are the stars that show on the mantle, right? So what the researchers did is that they matched up these stars, right, to where the constellations are, and they broadened the picture of the sky. And you have these constellations outside, right? They connect to where she is. And when you do that, right, Virgo, the Virgin, this is the crown, Our Lady, and the Leo, right? And our Lord is the lion from the tribe of Judah, which is the tribe of Judah is beautiful. Judah is the guy who changes Abraham's mind in the Old Testament, the first guy who sacrifices himself for the good of others, which is why Jesus is called Lion of the tribe of Judah. So these though don't appear on her, right? You don't see these constellations. Only if you take what's on her mantle and you push it out to what the stars look like at that time, then you see how they match up rather perfectly there. And then just some more recent stuff. You guys may have seen this here, which refers to the images reflected in the eye. And there's a few studies of this, I believe in early in the 20s, then in the 80s, and then more recently, they magnified the image in her eyes 2,500 times. And ophthalmologists, right, folks, scientists that are trained in the function of the eye, found 13 figures reflected in the eye. And what's curious about this reflection is when they are reflected exactly in the way that our eyes physically see images. There's a particular scientific name for it, which escapes my mind at the moment, but there's a scientific principle. Rodolfo, what's the name? Okay. No, pero ¿cómo se llama el hombre que tiene la...
Que descubrió el Pumpkin, es un
Pumpkins.
científico que descubrió que todos los seres humanos tienen el mismo ángulo de reflexión en los ojos, no importa qué raza sea. Pero lo descubrió en 1836,
Right.
300 años después de que ese hallazgo.
So 300 years after the tilma, after the apparition, we learned that her eyes reflect this scientific principle that is discovered in the year, in the 1800s or 1900s, in the year 1880 or whatnot. And when they looked at these particular images, they show they reflect exactly like our eyes would function. So if you were to look at the reflection of our eyes, this is how these people are reflected in her eyeballs. And we see Juan Diego, and these were some of the people that were present in the room when he showed the tilma to the bishop. That's just a close-up there of what you see. Now this, speaking, this looks weird, right? I mean, this is a 2,500 magnetized image, black little dots, and somehow we see these images of human faces reflected. So it's a very defies logic, if you will, to look at these, to see that, right? This is minuscule, tiny little dots that appear there. All right, so as I told you, I'm wrapping it up now. You know, the chapel was built. This is from the year 1855. It's a painting. This is the little chapel, Cerrito del Monte, the chapel on the hill, the famous chapel on the hill. These are stairs that folks take to get up there. But that's not where Our Lady is now. Our Lady used to be there. They moved it down here in the early 17th century, early 18th century. This was the basilica that was built. It was highly damaged by earthquake and then replaced. I don't have a new picture, but right next to it, over here, maybe over here actually, is a new basilica, very modern looking, not to my taste, built in 1976. And that's where the tilma is currently housed. So, our pilgrims that were there will go here to see the modern basilica in 1976. So, any other questions, comments, or any of you with any particular anecdotes about Our Lady? Ramon?
One detail that you asked, in 1921, the bombing of the basilica close to, with the purpose of destroying the image of Our Lady. There was a movement, a anti-clerical secularist movement under President Álvaro Obregón in Mexico, which led to the taking over of Plutarco Elias Calles, a Marxist president who went after the Catholic Church.
Got it.
And we all saw the movie of, Viva Cristo Rey and whatever.
And ahí que
Led
sale
by-
Blessed Miguel Pro.
Led by the devotion of a Mexican people towards Our Lady. There was a rebellion and they couldn't do it. They had to backtrack.
Got it.
There were priests that were killed, imprisoned and so on because they went after the Catholic Church. They saw the Catholic Church as usual as an obstacle for
To
the
their power.
implementation of an atheist Marxist government in Mexico.
Yeah. Thank you, Ramon, for that. Eduardo.
Observation regarding the image. And as you say, the image, they could read what it meant.
Yes.
And one interpretation that I read was that they saw this woman as the slave of the man of the cross that was greater. The slaves used to wear, so I read, used to wear the symbol of the master. So here is the slave of the master, of the man of the cross, and even as a slave, she is greater than their God sun and their God moon. And the second thing that I want to mention is something that my dad told me years and years ago. When we were talking about the Shroud of Turin, that this is the only image that we have of the Blessed Mother that she gave to us. We have no other image of her. This is the only image. The only one.
Well, I can show this because the acquisition position of this. So, just a brief story. This is an actual digital picture. As I told you, right now, the tilma is highly guarded and protected. It can turn around, and it turns around into a private viewing room. So there was a renowned photographer story is he was an atheist, and as a result of encountering Our Lady of Guadalupe and the image in that private room, he had himself a private revelation and converted to Catholicism. But this is one of those digital images that was taken, so it's a life-size reproduction of the image. I believe Our Lady is said to be 4'8", is what I recall reading. One other quick thing that I didn't point out, which is as far as you may have read in there. You may have read that I didn't point this out, but the colors cannot be duplicated by any natural means. Even modern technology cannot duplicate the colors that were used. So much less in the time of Juan Diego could you duplicate these colors, right? There was no natural way to do that. But curiously enough, her foot here, this is not painted at all. This is purely just the tilma. There's no paint there.
The other observation that I now remember also having read is that when you look at the image and you look, hasn't penetrated the fiber.
So I followed that thread, and it does.
It does penetrate the fiber.
Yeah. So the ink, if you will, does penetrate fiber.
Okay.
But
I followed that.
I never heard of that.
Yeah.
I have heard the contrary from people there.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I have understood
No,
that the image is not even within the cloth.
No,
It's
I've
just
read.
above the cloth.
I've read that, but I've also read believers, right? These are not skeptics, but Catholic scholars and believers that said no, the color does in fact penetrate. It does in fact penetrate.
But it cannot be duplicated.
It does not deteriorate.
It does not deteriorate at all.
That's the point.
Right.
The
And it is an
the
image.
fiber,
There's no brush strokes. There's no underlying, drawings where if you were a painter, you would draw an outline. There's simply there's none of that. There's perfect symmetry. So it is in fact an image. As Rodolfo was saying, the photosensitivity of the roses, much like the Shroud of Turin, which is not a painting either. It's an image, right? It's a photograph.
It's a negative.
That's
Right.
Neither the paint or the fiber deteriorates.
I don't know where.
Correct. But you'll see here, well, you can see closer there. But there are imperfections in the tilma, right? So right up, you can see, the lighting's right here, but right up and down here, this is una costura. This is a two-piece tilma, and this is a costura of this image here.
It's a scene, yeah.
It's a scene. So there are some imperfections natural within the tilma, and some of them are actually, some of the imperfections of the actual tilma are used in the image itself. Like here, Our Lady's lips, and this little piece down here in her lip. This is actually an imperfection of the tilma, but the way that the image is designed, it uses the imperfections of the natural tilma to enhance the actual image itself. Yes.
Just a couple of comments. One, this is obvious, but I heard Toledo say it, it struck me, I've never forgotten it, that this and the Shroud of Turin are God's work of art. We have two pieces of God's own work of art. This is one, and the other is, and then, let me, give me the comment. The other comment, I just learned today, but some people had already heard this. What I just saw today has to do with the other work of art, the Shroud of Turin, that they now have proved that following the Roman law, the Shroud of Turin has actually Jesus of Nazareth's obituary written on it. And they have actually, it's like almost like a, it's like a sentence, but it's a very, almost a paragraph long sentence in Latin, in Greek, and maybe the rest, I don't remember, Aramaic, I don't know. I think there were 3 languages, written in the 3 languages to say, Jesus of Nazareth, crucified on, is the obituary required by Roman law, because the Romans had a rule that the body, which normally didn't go into a cave like Jesus did, that the body of the people would be returned to their family after 1 year. So they had to have a way to identify, this is old bones left over. Who is in this thing? And so they had that inscribed on, and they've been able with new technology to actually decipher that and pick it out, and it's written. This is no longer any question. This is Jesus of Nazareth. And then it goes on to when he died, which is, to me,
Just
was
last anecdote, Hillary Clinton visited Basilica and
Well, somebody said
she
you
did
already
a
heard
private
it. I thought it
viewing
was recently.
of the
Just heard
Dilma,
this morning.
and the reporters were there, and Hillary Clinton is like, she was Secretary of State at the time. There's a bishop there, Andrew Drew, and she said, wow, this is a beautiful work of art. This is great. Who painted this? And he goes, God.
And of course, I mean, it's all
Thank you guys. Let's wrap it up. Thank you.